Hi, welcome back to the Alchemy of Healing, week 4. This week we're going to talk about boundaries. Yes, this is one of the most practical, applicable things that we need to do in order to show and exemplify our perhaps newfound sense of self-esteem and self-worth, uh, and to protect and contain what's already within us. So what we're going to do this week, we're going to take our few seconds here, our moment here to really get into it with each other. So make sure that you are in a safe place, you are able to listen, to participate, to really lean in and engage. Make sure you have your drink, your water, and your tea, and you're comfortable. And let's set an intention together to enter into this space with openness and appreciation and gratitude that today is, while I'm recording this video, it's a sunny day out. It's beautiful. It's starting to melt here. I'm thankful for the fact that I have this technology that I can use to record this video so that I can share myself with you. I'm grateful for my little dog here who's beside me. Here, Walter, do you want to say hello? You say hello. Hello, this is Walter. He's here beside me. So this is a way, again, to really enter into a space, set an intention, have some gratitude. My intention is that I'm as clear and open and engaged as I need to be so that you can really hear the message and be able to really incorporate boundaries into your life. And what we're going to do is first we're going to talk a little bit, we're going to review a little bit about self-esteem and why that's important. And then we're going to talk about boundaries, what they are, and what the benefits are of them. And then also we're going to get into a little bit about what they're not, because I think that there's a lot of confusion about what boundaries are and what they're not. And I really want to set the record straight for today. Okay? Sound good? Okay, so settle in. Take a deep breath. And we will start our chat today. So hopefully you have your workbook with you. You have your outcome statement next to you so you kind of know where we're going. And we will talk. So boundaries. Like it says in the workbook, boundaries are more than just the ability to say no. They're more than just straight up assertiveness. While that's very important, it's more than just that. And that's where we have to review what self-esteem is. Self-esteem is just an inherent knowledge and wisdom and knowing of your own internal, intrinsic sense of self-worth. Just for being here on the planet as a conscious human being, you are worthy. You don't have to do anything to be worthy. You don't have to be needed to be worthy. You don't have to prove yourself to be worthy. You just get to be worthy in and of yourself because you are here with us, participating in life. So that being kind of the basis of all of it, that I'm no better than you, you're no better than me. Yes, we're different, there's diversity, but there is an inherent equality to all of us. No matter your gender, your orientation, how you identify, any of it, we're all equal. Okay? And I know this is a message that is not delivered to us as children. We are very much told that we need to be good, or that we're not good enough, or we're too much, we're too emotional, we're not trying hard enough, And honestly, all of those are projections of the people who took care of us and raised us and put a lot of work into keeping us alive, for good or for better or for worse. Most of them, not everybody, but most of them did the best that they could. And we are a product of their low sense of self-worth that they're now projecting onto the children that they have in their care. So that narrative becomes our internal mental loop, our internal voice. And so we have to start to question that voice if that's true, or if that was just developed based on their issues with their own sense of self-worth that were passed on to them from their caregivers, which were passed on to them from their caregivers, and then the cycle continues. So the cool thing right now, you are in a position where you can stop that cycle in its tracks and question the validity of whether or not it's true that you need to do certain things to be worthy, or look a certain way to be worthy, or act a certain way to be worthy, or if that's just a given and everything else is icing on the cake, right? So really, really important. Again, this is a struggle that I've had to work through. I had to bring awareness and approval around. I still to this day get my help from my coaches, counselors, friends to remember this inherent worthiness. I have to get support for that. So it makes sense if you do too, or if you're struggling with this, or you just don't believe it. You're like, Becky, I don't believe you. Like, that's goes against everything that I've ever stood for, or I just can't, I want to believe it, but I just feel like I can't. That's normal too. And if you need to reach out and go deeper and get extra help, definitely make sure you book that call with me, or reach out to your own counselor, your own coach, your own therapist, so that you can discuss this issue in more depth with them, because it really is the root of all of it, right? And where boundaries come in is that boundaries are this external reflection. It's kind of like the working document, or we've got this foundation, and then built up from the foundation are boundaries. So it's like that foundational belief or knowledge or knowing that we are worthy is the basement of our house. It's keeping everything up. And then the structure around the house, the framing and the walls, all of that is our boundaries. So they maintain our sense of self, our sense of self-worth, our knowledge that not only are we worthy, but that other people are as well. It definitely demonstrates that kind of respect to have good boundaries. So that's the container. And then whatever happens within the container is the fun part, what I would call the feminine. The container itself is the masculine, and the inside is the container, which we don't get much into the polarities of masculine and feminine and any kind of dualistic polarity much in this course, but I do in my Science of Magic course. But that being said, it doesn't really matter. Just think of it as something that contains and helps and protects and demonstrates your own sense of self-worth. And it really helps you show up in the world at your best. Because what we're dealing with every day, day in, day out, with our kids, with our partners, with work colleagues, with our bosses, with people on the street, with service providers, everybody, it's always a relationship, a negotiation between two different people or a group of people. And having good boundaries is a way to maintain not only your sense of self-worth, but also to get your needs met, to get your desires met, to express yourself in the world, to be seen, to have intimacy. All of these things are what good boundaries enable. And so that's why they're really, really, really important. So how do boundaries serve you? What I've done in the workbook is I've narrowed it down to a few of what I think are the most important. And I just mentioned intimacy, and intimacy is number one on my list of why boundaries are important. And here's why. Because intimacy, in my estimation, is the nutrient that we need, that we're all dying for. And when we don't get the nutrient of intimacy met, then we're all starving, because we're all social creatures. And like I've talked about in previous lessons about the mind-body connection, remember we have what's called the limbic system. And the limbic system is what connects us to other people. And it's also connected to the older part of the brain, the fight or flight, which has to do with safety. So safety and social safety and shame and belonging and inclusion all go hand in hand to having a healthy, balanced nervous system. So intimacy is basically when you can show up honestly and authentically with another human being, being completely yourself, for good and for bad, because we all have good and bad components to us. We all have every spectrum of whatever human behaviors are possible. We all contain that potentiality within us. So to be able to be seen at our best and at our worst by somebody else in an authentic way feeds our souls, feeds our bodies, literally helps our bodies become safe and relaxed and regenerate our nervous systems and give us that rest and repair that we need, and that comfort and safety that we need in order for our bodies to run optimally. So that's how important intimacy is. And when we don't get enough intimacy, and you may notice this in our culture right now, is that loneliness is an epidemic. So we've got over 7 billion people on the planet. Yet, most of us, I could say, most of the time, whether you're in a relationship or not, whether you have a big family or not, whether you're constantly surrounded by people or you spend most of your time alone, a lot of people are reporting back that they feel lonely. And Teal Swan has a new book about this. It's called The Anatomy of Loneliness. And it gives you some really good insight as to what's going on within your system when it has to do with loneliness, which again, is an epidemic, and it's the root of anxiety. It's the root of depression, is this feeling like we're separate and alone. And so the way that I've found on a hormonal level and on a nervous system level and on a soul level, on a body level, on a mind level, all of the different levels, is that to meet this need to feel nourished and full, we have to focus on intimacy. And intimacy is also very, very, very vulnerable, because if you're showing yourself and you're not wearing a mask and covering up and pretending to be somebody that you're not, then if that person rejects you, then those sensations in your body don't really feel quote unquote good, right? The sensations of shame and the sensations of rejection. So we try to avoid that. So in my learning, what I've had to do is learn to sit with the sensation of rejection. Think of the last time I felt rejected or I felt shame, and actually be present with the sensations that come up in my body so that I can teach my body that I can actually handle it. And I don't have to avoid that. I don't have to try to avoid rejection or avoid shame, because I know that my system can handle it. I know I'm going to survive. So it's a practice. Again, it's not something that you like check off and you're good to go for the rest of your life. It's something that you build a muscle over time. And one of the things that I really admire my younger cousin for doing is he does challenges where he will go out and purposefully do things in order to be rejected, so that he can practice that muscle of rejection, so that he puts himself out there more. So he did this online course where he had to meet these challenges where he'd have to go out to the mall and high five people or ask them to take his picture. And the intention wasn't to necessarily get those things done, but it was to put himself out there and have people say like, no, like you're weird, get away from me, and to be able to handle that type of thing. So I thought he was really brave for doing that. I have my own ways that I try to push myself out there and do lots of public speaking. Really helps me, making sure that I am making lots of eye contact with people, and I consider myself more introverted than extroverted, so I have to push myself a little bit into that yellow zone so that I can prove that to my body that it's actually fine. And then I get used to it, and then I can push myself a little bit further and then a little bit further, right? Like we adapt in that orange zone. That orange zone then becomes, or that yellow zone then becomes our new green zone, and then we can push further, and then we can push further. So whatever practice for you to just like push yourself a little bit in being more truthful, telling the truth, being more authentic, being vulnerable with other people, so that you can feel those sensations in your body, be present with them, and know that you can handle it. And then what I've found happens is that you get that need for intimacy met and you feel nourished. So instead of having to turn towards addiction, which is what a lot of us do instead of getting that actual intimacy nutrient, we turn towards things like food or alcohol or shopping or working or fill in the blank, whatever your addiction is. And that's the thing that is kind of like a toxic substitute for the actual thing that we want, which is connection and intimacy. Okay, so again, I could go so deep into this topic. I'm just really scratching the surface today, but as you know, this is only an introductory type kind of course, so if you want to discuss this with me, just let me know. So that's the first thing, is it makes good boundaries make intimacy possible. The second one is it settles and relaxes our autonomic nervous system. So we've got the sympathetic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. And these are two parts of our central nervous system. Starts with our brain and our spinal cord, right? So the sympathetic nervous system is everything we have control over, but also everything involved in the fight or flight reaction, okay? And the autonomic nervous system is everything that has to do with rest and repair. So that includes our digestive system, our immune system, all of the things that are involved in long-term survival. Whereas the sympathetic system, you can think of it as more of the short-term survival and the conscious control that we have on our muscles. And then like our fingers and our hands is all under conscious control, whereas my stomach isn't under conscious control. It's more under my autonomic nervous system, or the ANS. So when we're in fear mode and all of the energy is constantly being shunted towards the SNS, or the sympathetic nervous system, we only have a finite amount of energy available. So that energy that's going towards fight or flight and raising our cortisol and our adrenaline is stealing energy from our sympathetic nervous system, or our long-term survival. And that's when our bodies start to wear down. And the way that I like to think of it and explain it is it's like having your foot on the gas and the brakes at the same time. Eventually you're going to wear out your car or your body. Okay, so when we have good boundaries, we are able to settle and relax that autonomic nervous system, or the sympathetic nervous system, so that the autonomic nervous system can take over and do what it needs to do in rest and repair and reproduction, that type of thing. And also involved in this is it improves our immune system. So when we feel safe, when we feel relaxed, our immune system can work optimally. It also turns on our gut. So when we have good blood flow and we're not constricted and tight and scared all the time, even if we're not aware that we're constricted and tight and scared, we are. And an example of that, to prove that you are, is if you have any kind of muscle tension, if you have any back pain, lower back pain, or you have neck pain, or you have jaw pain, or any kind of tightness. Headaches is another example. That means that most likely your sympathetic nervous system is on overdrive and your autonomic nervous system is being neglected. So we need to be able to relax, and we need to be able to express what it is that we need. And to do that is related to boundaries. Okay, and we also need to be able to digest our food properly and to have good blood flow to our stomach and to our intestinal system in our colon, so that we can absorb our nutrients and we can get the nutrients we need out of our food, and that also affects our immune system as well. I won't get into the mechanics of that, but I can, again, explain it to you if you ever want me to. And that helps the rest of our body function optimally because we have the building blocks that we need. We have the nutrients that we need in order to work at optimal level. And then the last one I have here is that it balances empathy. So Brené Brown kind of talks about sympathy versus empathy. And sympathy is kind of the way that she's got a really great movie that I'll post a link in the email. And it's a movie about, it's like this little cartoon with these bears, and basically sympathy is somebody's down in a hole, and in sympathy is you stand up above them, like you're not in the hole, you're standing above them, they're down in the hole, and you're like, oh, I really feel bad for you that you're down in that hole. And it's like feeling bad for somebody, and it doesn't necessarily do any kind of connecting or healing, because there's this amount of like, you feel bad, but like kind of like stay away from me because I don't want to feel bad either. Like, so there's this element of distance and disconnection, okay, which is why visually you think of it as like somebody's down there and I'm up here. So empathy is more like, oh, I've been down in that hole before, and you might even jump down in with them and help them get out, which is what a coach is really good at doing. Is I've made a lot of the same mistakes, or I've been down the road that you've been down, and I actually know how to get out of this hole. So come with me, I'll show you. And I know almost exactly, not exactly, because everybody's a little bit different, everybody's situations are a little bit different, but I know I have a very good idea of how you feel, and I really feel empathetic towards you, that I want to be able to lend any kind of assistance that I can. So empathy is that ability to feel the emotions, experience the emotions of somebody else alongside them. And while that is an amazingly, amazingly great skill, and a lot of us, especially a lot of people that are drawn to this type of course, they naturally are empathetic, or what we call empathic, in the sense that they pick up on how everybody around them feels, and they're really in tune with how everybody feels. And that's a really, really, really amazing, beautiful skill. However, there is kind of a shadow side to it, in that if you can't turn that on or off, if you have no conscious control over how you feel around another person, then you're completely at the mercy of how they feel, which renders you fairly powerless, right? So if I'm overly empathetic or overly empathic, and my partner comes in and he's really angry, now I can't feel good until he feels good. That's actually the definition of codependency, because I can't stay present enough with my own sense of self, my own boundaries, me, how I am. I can't do that. So I go on his ride, and I actually have to try to either fix him or overly give to him or cater to him in order for him to feel better, so that I can feel better, instead of just staying present with me. So who is it? Byron Katie says there's 3 people's business. There's my business, or your own business. There's your business. So my business, your business, and then there's God's business, or basically like nature's business, however way you want to look at it. So there's me and how I feel about me, there's you, how you feel about you and your situation, and then there's kind of the greater, what we're not in control of. The other way is the serenity prayer of, I accept the things that I cannot change, and know and have the ability to tell the difference between what I can change and what I can't. Just butchered that serenity prayer, but you know what I mean. So basically knowing what you're in control of, what you're not in control of, and what's another person and what's just kind of the natural laws of order. Also none of your business. So knowing the difference and having some awareness of whether or not you're responsible for somebody else and how they feel is really, really important, because it's my rule of thumb that we meet 50-50. So I'm going to take 50% of responsibility for what we co-create, and you take 50% for what you co-create in any interaction. As soon as I start to take more responsibility for how you feel than you're taking, I'm actually robbing that opportunity from you. And in a sense, it's narcissistic, it's arrogant, because I'm assuming that you can't take responsibility for yourself, or you can't take care of yourself. So I'm actually robbing you of your opportunity to do that and to meet me in a real equal relationship, and I'm actually taking care of you like I would a child. And when we do that in our adult relationships, it only leads to resentment on one or both sides. So it's really important to be aware of that we only take 50%. We only go 50% in relationships. We don't tip over into taking more than that, or we enter into the burnout, or that's where we get kind of like the energy vampires, or people that take too much from you and don't give enough back. We've set it up that way as givers because we're giving too much. We're not demonstrating our sense of self-value and self-worth because we're trying to prove it by giving too much, or by offering too much, or by buying too much, or whatever it is. So hopefully that makes sense. The goal with empathy is, yes, we can feel, yes, we can be aware. Like if my roommate comes home and she walks in and she hasn't had a great day, it's okay that I can feel that she's not feeling the greatest, or maybe she walks in and she's had a great day and she feels happy. But that's okay. It's just I want to be aware of that when she walks in, that's her and my limbic system connecting to her limbic system, and that if I want to stay where I am, that I have the choice to. So if she's not in a good mood, I don't have to be now in a bad mood as well. Or if she's in a good mood, I can be like, okay, I'm going to get on this train. I'm going to join in her turn on, in her passion, in her, so I've got some agency there and some choice, which is power, right? So I'm not giving away all my power. I'm actually maintaining it. And that's what I mean by containing and protecting my sense of self. So really important that we look at this, because it is a big issue with people that are givers and that are empathetic or empathic. Okay? So to summarize, there's kind of 2 steps towards building really, really, really good boundaries. And the first is, like I've harped on about over and over again, and we had a whole lesson about it, it's self-esteem. So changing our relationship to our own sense of self-esteem. And not only when you recognize your own preciousness and your own sense of self-worth, then you also, as a byproduct, recognize it in other people as well. Okay? So then the second step is to stay present and to stay with ourselves and not abandon ourselves. So again, Byron Katie, what she would say is, if I'm in your business or I'm in God's business, then I've actually abandoned my own business. I've abandoned my own emotions, my own sense of self, my own needs, okay? Because I'm so focused on somebody else's. And I know that we're all guilty of this. I've been guilty of this for sure, 100% in the past. And it doesn't lead to healthy relationships. It actually is a recipe for breaking them down, because resentment grows. And we can get into all of the reasons why that happens one-on-one if you're interested. Okay, so staying present with ourselves, listening carefully, being with our sensations, understanding our sensations. Go back to lesson 1 and look at that sensation chart. Being able to recognize what's going on in your body. Are you relaxed? Are you tense? What are you feeling? Are you anxious? What does anxious feel like? What sensations come up? All of that. What does it feel like when somebody walks in and they're angry? Do you feel safe? it does come down to senses of safety, what's going on there, just being present. You don't have to have all the answers on how to figure it out, but just at this moment, be aware and collect some data around what's going on within you. Okay, so this leads into the topic of what is a good boundary. So a good boundary is maintaining that sense of self, maintaining that sense of self-worth while recognizing and respecting somebody else's, and the best you can not crossing their boundaries. So we are very focused too on ourselves, and you can't cross my boundary, but we also want to recognize and be open to and have the humility around when we cross somebody else's boundary, being open to taking an adjustment for that. Because I know I can be very direct, very assertive, I can come across as almost, for people that are not used to it, I can come across as having high self-esteem. And so that can come across as arrogance for sure. And sometimes, again, like we talked about, that arrogance is actually just making up for my overcompensating for my feeling of self-worth. So we want to be able to recognize not only when we have our boundaries crossed, but also when we're crossing somebody else's, and that we can listen and be open and present with them and their experience so that we can make the adjustments and grow and heal and not do the same things that hurt each other over and over and over and over again. Okay, so that takes respecting their inherent preciousness, as Pia Melody would call it. Okay, so that's what good boundaries do, is they maintain that not only of your own preciousness, your own self-worth, but theirs as well. And that means boundaries mean being authentically yourself, telling the truth, saying when you need your needs met, expressing when your boundaries have been crossed, being assertive, sticking to the data, sticking to the present moment as well, and what's actually going on in your sight, your smell, your taste, your hearing, your understanding, and taking responsibility for all those things. So if somebody, we're going to talk a bit more about this in the communication lesson, which is next week, but when it comes to communicating your boundaries and expressing yourself, you're always taking responsibility for the way that you're perceiving things. So I perceive it to be, if we're in a fight, it's like I perceive that I feel like my feelings are hurt because this is what I understood when you said that you didn't like my outfit or whatever it was. I perceived it as me being not good enough, and that hurts my feelings, and I really want to be seen in good light by you, and I'm hoping that we can discuss this. So you're taking responsibility for how you feel. And if you have adjustments, it's like, could you ask them as requests? And again, we'll get more into that next week. But for now, just remember that part of having good boundaries is taking responsibility for your own sense of self. Okay? Instead of using you statements of like, you always do this. Using always and never is always going to come across as, and I just used it, is most often going to come across as a character attack. So just keep that in mind too. The words we use are very important. So if we're using words like you always or you never, first of all, it's probably not true. And second of all, using superlatives like that attack somebody's whole character, and they're automatically going to get defensive. So we just want to watch there too, because that means that we're crossing their boundary by attacking their character instead of giving them a healthy adjustment of what they could be doing that would make things flow easier between you and your connection to be easier. So keep that in mind. This is it seems like a very complicated subject, and when we have real life scenarios that we can talk about one-on-one, it really breaks it down, and you can see what's happening in your own life in a way that's like, oh, okay, so like an actual fight that we could talk about that you've had with somebody, or an actual feeling of resentment that you have towards somebody or something. When we can talk about a real tangible thing like that, then all of this starts to make more sense. as opposed to right now I'm being very general and abstract. So if it doesn't quite make sense to you, that's okay. It will when we talk. If you've got a specific kind of issue like this, which we all do, frankly. So what are boundaries not? What's the antithesis of what boundaries are? There are things that disconnect us. So boundaries ultimately will bring us together, they facilitate intimacy and connection. Walls, which are not boundaries, which are like either masks or pushaways or any kind of behavior or action or words that push somebody farther away from us as opposed to bringing them closer for intimacy. So what walls are things in the workbook. There's a list: lying, guilting, manipulating, controlling. And these are sneaky. Manipulation and control are really sneaky. We have to really unravel a lot when it comes to that. Withholding, so not telling the truth, not speaking your truth, not asking for what you want. Withholding sex is another thing that people try to do. Withholding, the truth, or just kind of not expressing yourself. Acquiescing, which just means like going along with something that you don't really want to do, but you don't want to rock the boat, so you do it anyway. And you know it's acquiescing if you feel resentful after. Overly accommodating, over-involvement, again, those things are going more than that 50%. When you're overly accommodating or overly involving yourself or being overly useful, you're actually robbing, it's actually narcissistic and arrogant, right? Because you're taking too much responsibility for something that somebody could be doing themselves. And if they could do it themselves, they might get some satisfaction out of that and some connection and intimacy out of that. So we want to be able to give people and allow people to show up in a way that isn't enabling them to just sit back and not have to try, because nobody really wants to do that either, right? So I hope that makes sense. Ignoring, minimizing or dismissing. This is a common one that men do. Women do it too, but I find that it's a really ingrained kind of socialized masculine thing to do, or male thing to do, is to minimize or dismiss or make it be like, oh, you're overreacting, or this isn't a big deal, or calm down. That type of thing is like very dismissive, and it actually pushes away. It's disrespectful. Okay, so we want to be allowing the other person and respectfully being present with the other person's experience, whether we agree with it or not. Again, a good boundary is you don't have to agree with everything that somebody is sharing with you per se, but what you do want to accomplish is the recognition that they're allowed to have the experience that they're having because they're having it, right? Like, that's the reality of the situation, is you can't argue with somebody's feelings. It's actually not logical, because the feelings are coming up in real time, the sensations are coming up in real time, and to try to argue somebody out of their own feelings and experience and sensation is both gaslighting and dismissive and disrespectful. And you don't like it when it's done to you either, right? So we want to be mindful around that. Neglecting, and then threats or ultimatums. This is what I find the most common, is that people are confusing boundaries with threats or ultimatums. Now, there's always choice involved in setting up a boundary. So, for example, I had a client who she wanted to be there for her fiance. But she also wanted her boundary was that she needed rest and it was getting late. So she communicated to him, okay, I'm available to talk to you, because he was going through something difficult, and she wanted to be there for him. So there was that part of it, but she had a boundary around how late she wanted to stay up. So she just communicated that boundary of, I want to be there for you, I want to listen, just so you know, I need to go to bed at 11. So that's an example of having a good boundary. It's not a threat. So the way that would sound threatening is kind of like, If you don't want to talk to me, then I'm not going to stay up all night, kind of thing. So again, there's like an element of like threat in there or manipulation or control. That's never what a boundary is. A boundary is always respecting the other person's choice while also respecting your own choice. And you can give different choices of like if you want to talk tomorrow or you want to connect on this issue again tonight before 11 p.m. Like I'm available for that. But again, it's respecting your own need for rest and your own needs as well as the other person's. So again, it can be tricky, and it can be because we're so conditioned to manipulate and control and find sneaky ways to get our needs met instead of being direct and honest and open and vulnerable, that because we're trying to protect ourselves from that fear of not getting these needs met, which is ultimately the innocent part of us of why we do these wall behaviors instead of actual connecting boundaries, is out of fear, right? It's out of being afraid that we're not going to get the thing that we want. And so there's always that innocent part of you that's just trying to get what they need. And we all have needs, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that we want to do it in a way that's not only respectful towards the other person, but also towards us, and ultimately leads to actually getting what we want in the end, instead of resentment. So, really important. Okay, so this brings us kind of to the end. We want to also remember that boundaries are a tool, and they don't have to be set in stone. So you can set a boundary, like I need to go to bed at 11 every single night so that I'm rested. But you can also incorporate, as you get better with this, you can incorporate some flexibility. Okay, so I want you to know that over time they can change and flow as you change and flow and grow. Okay, so we want to be consistent with them at the beginning, but also keep in mind that they can change over time. That's fine. That's actually great. Because they're a tool. It's kind of like you have training wheels on at the beginning, and then you take the training wheels off, and you can be more fluid in your boundaries. They're not walls. They don't have to be built up around you and stay there forever. They can be malleable and flexible, okay, when you're ready and when you feel confident in them and in yourself and in your self-worth, okay? So this week, what we're going to do for the exercise is think to the last time that your boundary was crossed, okay? And maybe think of a time too where you crossed somebody else's boundary and they reacted and you did not, you went into shame or you went into self-protection or defensiveness. That could be part of what you do too, as kind of a level 2. But level 1, think of the last time your own boundary was crossed. And think of or pay attention next time you feel like one has been crossed. And what did you see? What did you feel? What did you hear? What beliefs come up around yourself, around your own self-worth? Are you putting yourself below them? Are you putting yourself above them? Are you feeling inferior or superior? How do you feel about the other person? Has that changed? What are you communicating? What are you too afraid to communicate? Like really write down, journal everything that maybe you want to say but you're too afraid to say, or brainstorm some different ways of how you would communicate your boundary of how you feel in real time and what it is that you want. And next week, where we're going to get more into desire and communicating desires, which is important in expressing boundaries. So now that we kind of know what boundaries are, next week we're going to learn how to communicate them, because that can be an equally difficult step in this process. So just kind of journal, think of some ways that maybe you could express them, or inherently, if you're good at this already, like how can you build on that? If you know that you're not great at this, then maybe try to find some ways to practice by journaling it out instead of putting so much pressure on yourself to have to be able to come up with it in real time. just do some practice, some self-reflection, and write down what you wish you would have said or what you still want to say, and just either share it with a coach, a counselor, a friend that you trust, and have a little bit of dialogue and discussion around what you could have done to maintain that boundary. All right, so that's your exercise this week. Again, as a review, it's in the workbook. And again, if you haven't booked your 1-hour session with me, definitely click on the link in the email and do so. I'm really looking forward to that, so we can go a little bit deeper into what's personally going on for you, and if you have any questions. And that's it for this week. All right, good. Next week will be really exciting information as well. Needs and desires and communicating them. So I'm looking forward to that as well. Okay, have a great week.